Well, good morning, everybody. My presentation is on should collegiate athletes be paid, and I'm Mike Martin. So overview of what I'm going to talk about, why I chose this topic, what started this whole controversy with the Ed O'Bannon case and the ruling that came from that case, and all three arguments, all three sides of the argument of this topic, and my actual view of what I think about this topic. So why I chose this topic? It's a highly controversial topic that's been being talked about for the last decade, and that's in the news, and that every sports writer wants to get their piece out there. And my sports background gives me interest in wanting to talk about this topic with being a collegiate athlete myself, and I can relate to all sides of the argument. I think that all sides are valid, and I think that they all have a point, but we'll go into all three sides of that later. So at first, the Ed O'Bannon case. This case started over 10 years ago. It started the ball rolling with if collegiate athletes should be paid. It started with Ed O'Bannon, who played at UCLA in the 1990s and won NCAA basketball championship with the Bruins in 1995. And one day he saw his likeness being portrayed in an NCAA basketball video game and got pretty upset. Ed had high hopes to go to the NBA after his collegiate career, which didn't pan out for him, so he had to find another way to make money after college. And when he saw that the NCAA was making money off of a guy who looked exactly like him with his stats and his stature in a video game, which they're making millions of dollars off, he got pretty mad about that. So he filed a lawsuit with a group of other plaintiffs against the NCAA in the early 2000s. And his main argument was he felt as if the college athletes should get a piece of the pie. And the case lasted about 9 years. The ruling, Ed O'Bannon and his other plaintiffs actually won the case. And there was 3 major takeaways. 2 of them for the O'Bannon and group, and one of them actually you could say was a win for the NCAA. So the first one was the stipend system that came as a result of the case, and that said that a collegiate athlete is allowed to make up to $5,000 a year. So the athlete could receive a check each semester up to $5,000 a year total for the whole year. That was meant to be extra spending money for the athletes, so they recognize that with school and their sport is way more than a full-time job, and they don't have any money, or they don't have any time to make that extra spending money to have a social life and to maybe spend on themselves. And the main thing is that people said that this is just going to be a competitive advantage for big schools, kind of the rich get richer when it comes to if I'm Ohio State or Michigan, I'm going to be able to afford the $100 million that it's going to cost to pay major athletes at my school $5,000 a year. But if I'm a MAC school or a smaller D1 school, D2 school, I'm not going to be able to afford that $100 million a year to pay my student athletes. So if I have recruiting trips and I have a major recruit and say, hey, I can give you the full $5,000 a year, and the small schools aren't going to be able to say that. It's only going to get them better recruits. So another interesting thing was the scholarships. The NCAA cannot stop schools from paying what is called a full cost of attending scholarship. So before this case, a full scholarship didn't mean absolutely every single thing paid. So the school was able to nickel and dime you when it came to transportation fees, personal care. Say you needed extra psychological help outside of the school, it didn't pay for all those things. So now the NCAA can't stop them from doing full cost of attending scholarships, which means that it can encompass all those extra side programs. And this obviously minimizes costs out of pocket for athletes, which I just mentioned they don't have any time to make any money on their own during the school year. So this is the main ruling that most people know from this case, and it's their marketing rules. So this is the one that the NCAA could count as a win. athletes still cannot individually market themselves via sponsorships. So if I'm Johnny Manziel and I'm a big figure in the NCAA and then in college football, I'm not allowed to sign any deal with Nike or Adidas and have any contractual obligations to wear their gear and get paid for it. But they said that they can. Athletes can be paid for their likeness in video games, and this resulted in the NCAA just stopping the video games all together because they don't know how they weren't going to be able to pay the third string long snapper for Texas for being a guy in a video game, and let alone come up with a program on how to pay them and how much to pay them. So they kind of just thought it as easier as just to stop the whole video games all at once. And Ed O'Bannon said in an interview that he doesn't really like being known as the guy that ruined the video games for all the young kids out there. But so like I mentioned, there was three sides of this argument. So I'm going to go over three sports writers and their views, as long as in my view also. So the pro payment of college athletes, Tony Manfred of Business Insider. The against the payment of college athletes, Jesse Washington of The Undefeated, and that there isn't a fair payment system for Scoop Jackson. So Tony Manfred started off his article with putting some staggering statistics out there. The average FBS football player is worth over $137,000 per year. The average men's basketball player is worth over $280,000 per year. And an average collegiate scholarship is only worth $23,204. And these statistics are from around 2014, 2015, so it might have even went up since then. But this just goes to show you how much money that they are worth to the program. Men's football is obviously lower than men's basketball because of how many players are on each team, with men's basketball only being 12 to 15 players on a team. And the only reason I mentioned men's football and men's basketball, obviously there's more sports out there with the women's sports, but these are the two highest grossing sports in collegiate athletics. And it's pretty crazy to see that the average college scholarship is only that $23,000 mark. So he kind of says that they're not getting compensated correctly. He goes on to say that he thinks that they should adopt the NFL models, the NFLPA, and the NFL agreed that players should split up to 46.5% of all revenue. So it should depend on each year. So you get the total revenue brought in by the NCAA Men's Basketball Association, saying that the men's basketball players should split like right around 50% of that. And right now, you can see that currently the money by the NCAA is split up by coaches, administrators, conference commissioners, and the universities. And another fact that I saw in this article said that Roy Williams, for winning the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship, was paid $950,000 as a bonus. And that's kind of hard to look at when you see that all the players do all the hard work in the games to help win that championship. Obviously, Roy Williams has a big impact, but it comes down to the kids that are performing and winning that. So it's pretty hard to see that, like I said in the slide before, the average scholarship is $20-some thousand, and Roy Williams is getting $950,000 for winning one game for his school because of all the revenue that he's going to make for the school for winning that championship. And then it's hard to see all the penalizations that collegiate athletes still get in trouble for after not even seeing any of the money that the NCAA is bringing in. And one example of that is getting penalized for things like transferring. You would think that there should be less regulation around kids choosing a new school that they want to go to. If you're not familiar with the rule, you can move up in division as much as you want, but if you move down, there's going to be penalties, or if you move within your conference, there's going to be penalties. So they've actually, since this article has been written, they've actually came up with rules where if you go to, say, Ohio State and Urban Meyer leaves, you're going to have free reign to transfer somewhere else. So if the coach that you came there to play with, that you're going to have an opportunity to try to go to a different school. So they're actively working on that, but it's hard to just see the penalties that kids have and how they're not getting the compensation. So that was Tony Manfred's argument on the subject. So Jesse Washington was against the payment of collegiate athletes, and he thinks that the greatest compensation should be their education. And a quote from his article is, "The biggest crime in college sports isn't that the system is rigged against paying college athletes, it's the money worshiping American culture is set up against educating them." So he thinks that they should work on focusing on their need to focus on life after college, and that athletics is a great thing on their resume. I know from personal experience that the job that I landed after college, they told me in my interview that they strictly look for D2 and D3 collegiate athletes because of the intangibles that come with playing a sport, and that they know that you're not going to be able to get that real work experience while you're in college, but all the things that playing a sport means to being a successful person in the workforce after college. So that's kind of what Jesse Washington was trying to say, because of the stat at the bottom here says only 2% of college athletes go on to be professionals. So that other 98% is going to have to figure out something after school. Like I said, Ed O'Bannon had plans to play in the NBA after college. Didn't work out for him. Kind of got mad that he didn't make money for what he was doing in college. But maybe if he would have taken a different route in college, he wouldn't have been maybe trying to scratch for that extra buck after. And Scoop Jackson of ESPN kind of had the third argument, which is saying that both sides are very compelling arguments, but there's really not a way to do this right now. There's not a way to be fair to all collegiate athletes. And in his article, he's quoted saying there is no system of payment that can be put in place that is fair across the board to all students, all sports, and all schools that participate in college athletics. And he raises the questions: how do you decide who gets paid? Is it by performance? Is it by position? I mean, you could just think of an example of Ohio State quarterback. Are you going to pay him $50,000 and you're going to pay the stud on the women's golf team $10,000? I mean, how is that fair? It just depends on if you're in a revenue-driven sport. There's just a million examples that you could think of on how there's just not a fair payment plan that can be put in place. You may think that they should be compensated. You may say that they shouldn't be, but even if everybody decided, yeah, they should probably make a little bit of money, there's no fair way across the whole NCAA on how they should be paid. And that's kind of why they came up with the stipend system. It's kind of just an extra couple $1,000s in their pocket, potentially to help with those costs of not being able to make extra spending money during the year. So my view, I actually agree completely with Scoop Jackson. There's too much evidence supporting the payment of college athletes to leave it alone, and obviously that's why the Ed O'Bannon case came to light. And I think that the ruling that they made was fair, and I think that the stipend system is going to be here for a long time because there's not enough research done to implement a fair plan. Just between football and basketball, those guys should be being paid a lot of money, but you got to think of the small sports that are just there for the people playing them at the colleges that don't make any money. I mean, football at big schools alone is there just to pay for almost all the other sports at some of these schools. So just to keep all the other sports afloat. So not sure how they're going to come up with a plan to be fair to all collegiate athletes. And these are my citations.
Michael, thank you.
Thank you.